Welcome into another edition of the LSU Sports Insider Podcast. Today is Tuesday, February the 18th. I'm Zach Ewing. With me today, Advocate beat writers Koki Riley and Reed Darcey. We try to focus these shows in, guys, but frankly, this is going to be a little bit of an ADD. There's a lot going on at LSU right now, and it was hard to just pick one thing. So we're going to talk about the weekend kind of at large, and it was just about a perfect weekend for LSU, minus the fourth quarter of the women's basketball game in Austin, where LSU women lost only their second game. They had a 12-point lead in the third quarter, couldn't hang on. Reed was there. We're going to talk about that.
I ate lots and lots of tacos in Austin.
I'm jealous.
Yeah, it was great.
Oh, wow.
What's the best taco in Austin?
Ooh, man. So I went to this place called Matt's El Rancho. I mean, that place was fantastic. Really good. I had smoked brisket tacos. Just wonderful, Tex-Mex, it really is on a different level in Houston and Austin over there, so I had a good time.
All right, well, from tacos to stick crowns, we're going to talk first about what did go right for LSU this weekend, and that is the gymnastics. We talked about it last week's podcast, number 1 versus number 2 battle at the PMAC on Friday night, and number 2 LSU with a season high, they break 198, and they take down number 1 Oklahoma, this is gymnastics regular season results are what they are, right? Like they don't matter hardly at all for the postseason, but it's still a pretty big feather in the cap of this LSU program and kind of backing up the national title from last year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you look at it again, keep it in context, it's not that big of a deal that they won and that they outscored Oklahoma because they're probably going to see Oklahoma 2 more times, right, in the SEC tournament and in the latter stages of the NCAA tournament. But yeah, it is a big deal because you're outscoring a team that's been the standard bearer in gymnastics the last few years, and you're doing it in your home arena. It was a really great environment, and I think from that meet you can say that LSU kind of has the depth to really compete with the top teams in the country, especially when you add a freshman like Kaylin Chio to the returning talent you had, especially with Haley Bryant and Aaliyah Finnegan. Haley's not even doing all 4 events yet. She should start doing that soon, I suppose. So having that is going to make them even better, and it's kind of scary for everyone else around the country, I think.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is like you're doing this without Haley Bryant doing every event.
Yeah.
I don't think she's done bars yet because of injury. Kaylin Cho is the next star at LSU Gymnastics. Like, it never ends, Koki. It just seems like every year you look up and they've got 2 more world-class gymnasts on this team.
Yeah, you mentioned Connor McLean, who was the freshman star last year, and they're just absolutely loaded. And I don't think they had Olivia Dunn this past weekend as well. Chase Brock got hurt before the meet started, so I'm saying all these kind of negative things about injuries and stuff, and gymnastics is a very physical sport. You're going to get those injuries, but at the same time, you need to have the depth to withstand all that.
And LSU has that depth.
Clearly, they do.
Yeah. And we should point out, Zach, the NQS scores started this week, and some fans might be confused about why is LSU number 3 in those rankings after they beat the number 1 team in the country. The way that works is you take 6 scores. 3 of those scores have to be road scores, your 6 best scores, and then you take away the best score, which is what LSU did against Oklahoma. You drop that and then average the remaining 5, and that's your NQS score, and that's where you rank in the standings. So that's how it works, and that means that LSU is number 3 and Oklahoma is still number 1.
And part of that calculation is that Arkansas meet that they did not perform very well in on the road.
That's still counted in the road scores.
Yeah,
and that's why I love fans complain about the rankings, like in other sports where they go, well, our team won twice, we should have moved up, or how can we be behind this team that we beat head to head, and all, and it's almost like they want analytics, they want computer rankings. But then whenever the computer rankings are in charge, like with the BCS or now with this NQS gymnastics score, it doesn't make sense to the human brain that number 2 beat number 1 and fell to number 3. It's you get a lot of table. But the point of this is it's all going to come out in the wash, as you said, Reed. They're going to face each other again. LSU plays competes against Kentucky, number 9 Kentucky on the road this Friday. Then they have a meet at the River Center against George Washington the following Friday. Home against Georgia is their last home meet, and then at Auburn in the regular season, March 14th. The SEC championships are in Birmingham. They will meet Oklahoma again there, as well as all the other top SEC teams. And then as you said, probably in the national championship in Frisco.
If both things go right for both programs, then yeah, they'll definitely meet again. That time with postseason NCAA title on the line, maybe. So should be interesting.
I said Frisco. I mean Fort Worth. DFW.
Yeah.
Is where the national championships are in April. So gymnastics moving right along, super impressive. Women's basketball, Reed, looked like they were going to get another super impressive win. Their defense was so good over the first, I'd say, 2.5 quarters of that game at Texas, a team that had just taken it to South Carolina. And LSU, I would say for the first half and really into the third quarter, looked like the best team in the country, and then it all kind of fell apart.
Yeah, and I think it's a pretty consequential loss. I mean, you don't want to overreact too much to a close loss to a top 5 team in February, but had LSU hung on to that 12-point third quarter lead, and had they hung on to win, they'd be in the picture for a 1 seed right now in the tournament. And now they're not. Now they're looking at a 2 or 3 seed. I don't think that matters a whole lot to Kim Mulkey and her coaching staff and people in that program, but not having that 1 seed is going to make your path to the Final Four a little bit tougher, right? So if you just imagine had LSU won that game, how differently would we look at them in terms of the national picture? It's an interesting question to think about. Obviously, of course, I think they still could theoretically get a 1 seed, but they have to win the SEC tournament, right? And that's going to be really difficult. As we all know. So I think this loss, if you think about it big picture, it could possibly come back to bite them because they had it, and now they have to drop back down to a 2 or 3 seed. So we'll see how it shakes out. But really, really important game that had a lot of implications, I think.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about this before where a little bit like Jay Johnson, Kim Mulkey's, just let me host. That's all I want. Let me be a top 4 seed and host those first 2 rounds. But if you look beyond that, the women's tournament this year, for the past several years they've done this, but this year 2 regions are in one location and the other 2 regional finals are in another. It's not like the men where there's 4 different regional final locations. So this year the 2 locations are Birmingham and Spokane.
You don't want to get sent to Spokane.
A little bit of a difference there. Yeah. Just a little bit of a difference there as far as getting fan support and your travel time and energy that you need to take traveling. Like, you'd like to be in Birmingham. Now, if you're it gets a little murky because unless you're one of the top 2 1 seeds, if you were a bottom 2 1 seed, you probably get shipped to Spokane. Whereas if you're a 2 seed, it's more of kind of a coin flip which one they happen to seed you with. So now that LSU looks like it's going to slot as a 2 seed, and like we can talk about how wide open this tournament is in this breath too, because Notre Dame is now number 1. I mean, this is the most number 1s I can remember in a women's basketball season. You've had South Carolina, you've had UCLA, you've had now Notre Dame. I think Texas got some number 1 votes. Like, you could make an argument for a lot of different teams.
Right?
USC,
yeah, USC, and UCLA is still getting number 1 votes as well. So
and it had LSU won on Sunday, they're probably getting some number 1 votes.
Absolutely.
At 26-1. So like, it is so wide open that a 2 seed is not necessarily the worst thing in the world, because it's not like there's 1 or 2 teams like we just have to avoid that team like there has been for so many years in the past. UConn, certainly you can make an argument for number 1. I forgot to mention them after they blasted South Carolina.
Yep. There are 7 teams that are really competing for a national title, and I don't think that there's a whole lot separating all of those 7 teams, because when you look at it, I did fill out the AP poll over the weekend. It was pretty tough, and you had to split a lot of hairs. I had Texas personally number 1, but it was really tough to choose between them and Notre Dame. I don't have any kind of argument there if you ended up choosing Notre Dame. But I just went with Texas because their schedule's been a lot tougher. So I think when you look at the number 1 team, in my eyes at least, number 1 team is Texas, number 7 team is LSU. LSU was really, really close to beating Texas, and they were at Texas, and they were really evenly matched for the entire game. So all those 7 teams, I'd consider them in the same tier of teams, and there isn't much separating them. But of those 7, only 4 can go to Tampa in the Final Four. So we'll see how it shakes out. It should be pretty fun. The race is wide open. There's no South Carolina is not as dominant as they always are. I think we can say that now. UConn is really inconsistent. You don't really know which UConn's going to show up on any given night. And then you got USC, UCLA. Those 2 are evenly matched, and Texas is pretty new to the picture. We'll see what they turn out. So it's a wide open race, and I think that's a positive thing for LSU because they're in that mix.
My only question for you, Reed, is where would you rather go, Spokane or Birmingham? Just as
I'd rather go to
before.
Birmingham. I like
Okay.
Birmingham, cool place. I don't know.
You don't want to go out there and explore the country a little bit?
It's a long flight. It's a long flight. I
And
don't
there's
know.
a connection there too. Like
Yeah.
you're not flying direct to
No,
Spokane.
it's a lot of travel.
You might love it. Who knows, though?
Yeah,
I don't
man.
know. I've never been there, so I'd like to
Home
see
of
it.
Steve Gleason. So you mentioned there's 7 teams and only 4 get to Tampa. Also, only 4 go to Birmingham. Now, USC and UCLA probably rather go to Spokane. They'll stay on the West Coast. So those two, I would imagine that's where they'll get seated. I mean, the NCAA does do some geographic arrangement like that. Then you have 2 others in UConn and Notre Dame where they're not very close to either one, although both are still obviously closer to Birmingham, especially Notre Dame, than they are to Spokane. And then you have the 3 SEC teams involved. LSU has lost to both South Carolina and Texas. Now, they were both fairly competitive games. They were both on the road. I don't think it's like LSU can't beat these teams. But if it comes down to who gets Birmingham, right now you have to put LSU third in that pecking order, right?
Yeah, you do because they lost both games. And Zach, do you want to break down the specific loss to Texas? Do you want to get into the nitty gritty?
Yeah, let's do it.
So I think when you look at it, really evenly matched. Texas and LSU wound up shooting identical percentages from the floor, 33%. They were both 21 of 63, I believe. And the difference in the macro sense, the difference is the free throws, right? Texas went 21 of 21 and LSU went 13 of 19. If LSU makes more of their free throws, then it's probably a different game and maybe they can win. But if you look at it, if you sort of drill down a little bit and why did LSU lose that 12-point lead and why did they shoot only 33%? From the floor, I think you have to look at LSU's offense against Texas's defense, and Texas did a really, really good job of defending them. They put a lot of pressure on the ball. They did a lot of ball denial, and they really made life difficult for LSU. Like even the most basic passes, the most simple passes, the most basic inbounds plays were really difficult, and LSU had to work for them. And Texas did a good job of making life difficult not only on Michaela Williams and Flajie Johnson and Issa Morrow. Every shot they took was difficult. They also made life difficult for LSU's role players and bench players, right? LSU only got 9 points from players not named Michaela Williams, Flajie Johnson, and Issa Morrow. And I don't think that's really a recipe for success in these types of postseason games that they'll find themselves in pretty soon. I think they need more from the supporting cast around the big 3 if they want to if they want to make a deep run through March. So I'll look to see how LSU figures out its offense. When they play more of these top defensive teams, I'll look to see if they can start to get more consistent production from their supporting cast. And I think if they do, then LSU fans should be confident they could make it to Tampa. But if not, then they'll probably be looking on the outside of that.
Do you think the Flage injury had any effect on the game whatsoever?
No, I don't think so. I think she's fine. She played around 35 minutes. I think she looked really smooth. She looked fluid. I don't think it really had much of an effect on her.
The four players, Samaya Smith, Michaela Williams, Flajie Johnson, and Issa Morrow played 36 minutes or more.
Yeah.
After that, last year Poa played 26. Okay, so you basically had the same 5 on the floor for almost 3/4 of the game. Nobody else played more than 9 minutes. Kaylin Gilbert only played 6 minutes. I was kind of surprised. Like you're going to need more depth than that at some point.
You do, and that's typically how the minutes are distributed for a Kim Mulkey team. That's typically what it looks like. But I think in an ideal sense, you want that scoring to be a little more balanced, and you need more than 6 minutes and 3 shots for Kaylin Gilbert. It wasn't quite the right game for her because LSU needed a lot of ball handlers to break that all that pressure that Texas was sending at them. But I think Kaylin Gilbert, she's the X factor, right? I think if she gets going, if she gets in her groove, then I don't see a way that LSU loses because that extra punch is really what can put them over the top. But if she's taken out of the game like she was against Texas and like she was against South Carolina, then LSU's really going to have to fight to win these kinds of games.
Those are some Thibodeauian rotations there with the minutes. And
Tom Thibodeau,
yeah.
No doubt about it. I mean, the other thing I'll say, and you mentioned this, Reed, but I just want to reiterate, Texas was 21 of 21 from the free throw line.
Really impressive.
10 of 10, Madison Williams was almost half of that. Madison Booker, I'm sorry. And so I don't want to make it seem like, again, You're on the road. You had the lead. Yes, you want to hold on to that. The sky's not falling here. LSU can beat that team. I mean, if Texas just has a good day from the free throw line and not like an unbelievable day, like and they were 21 of 21, 4 of those were in the last 30 seconds when they're just salting away the game. So before that point, let's say they're 17 of 17. If they're just 13 of 17 instead of 7, which is still good, then LSU's actually got a 1-point lead going into the last 30 seconds.
Yep.
Like that's how thin the margin is here. But when you're playing a top 3 team in the country, you're going to have to be that good.
And then LSU's looking at a 1 seed, right? So it's pretty crazy how thin the margins are and how differently the picture sort of shook out based on what happened.
You have to imagine
in
they play one of these 2 teams in the SEC tournament, though.
Yeah, maybe both of them. I mean, that's the thing. And now they're looking at the 3 seed. Whether Texas gets 1, South Carolina gets 2, or vice versa, they've split and they're tied right now. Who has the tiebreaker at this moment? Do you know?
I think it actually might come down to a coin flip based on based on the tiebreakers. I haven't looked at it since LSU lost, but it could come down to a coin flip, which would be pretty interesting.
But either way, barring the unlikely scenario that one of those 2 teams loses twice more, LSU will be the 3 seed.
Yes.
In the SEC tournament. And if that's the case, you're going to have to, and again, barring an upset in the early rounds, you're going to have to face one of them in the semifinals. And then if you could win that, then the other one in the final. So a difficult road for LSU. But if you talk about that 1 seed conversation, that's the one thing that could get you back in is go win the SEC tournament and beat both of them, avenge both of your losses.
Sure. Easier said than done, though.
I'm glad you mentioned Kaylin Gilbert because, I think I watched what game? I watched the second Tennessee game, or at least a good chunk of it, and the way she was going off, it was really puzzling to be like to see that and not be like, why can't you do that in like half these LSU games when we've only really seen it against Tennessee in those 2 Tennessee games. It's I don't really have a great explanation for it. You probably do though.
Well, I think if you look at that game specifically, she really got going once Flage and Anissa Morrow got in foul trouble. They pick up their 3rd fouls. They both go to the bench. And then Kaylin Gilbert can sort of run the offense herself, right? She can take it at the top of the key and create her own shots and play off Michaela Williams. And that's a really good role for her because she can pick her spots and she create her own shots with that. I think when she has to be on the court at the same time as all 3 of LSU's stars, then it can kind of be tough for her to find the right place for her shots and where to pick her spots. So maybe when she comes off the bench, maybe she can sort of prop up some lineups that LSU has with its bench players while a couple of the stars are taking a breather. I think maybe that's a subtle tweak that Mulkey can make with her rotations to really unlock the best version of KG because, like I said, I think they'll need her in March.
Yeah, like the Vinnie Johnson role, the microwave coming off the bench.
Right.
Yeah.
So interesting stuff from LSU women's basketball. Just 4 games left now, Reed. I mean, it's coming down to it.
Oh, wow.
Yep. Down the stretch. There's 2 home games left. They still have to go on the road to Kentucky, which is not going to be an easy win to get. And they also have to go to Alabama, which is going to be a tough game as well. So don't just assume that they're going to sweep through those last 4 games. It's not going to be very easy for them to win out. But I think still, big picture speaking, they are firmly in the race for a 2 seed or a 3 seed. I think they'll, barring something catastrophic, that they should be starting the tournament in the PMAC again.
Yeah. And now it is worth mentioning. I say LSU's going to be the 3 seed. If they were to lose to Kentucky, they would actually be in 4th place.
Yeah.
Although Kentucky also has games left, just looking against Tennessee and South Carolina. So it's still up in the air right now. They'd be the 3 seed. If they win at Kentucky, almost certainly the 3 seed. But that is the story going into just 2 weeks left in the women's basketball regular season. So we're coming down to it. Lots more to talk about there. You are watching the LSU Sports Insider. Give us a like on YouTube, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and 5-star review if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify is always appreciated. We got a 30-second break, and we're going to be back, and then we'll let Koki talk LSU baseball time.
There's no better place to parlay than Caesars Sportsbook. Parlay Builder gives you all the game day action from all across the league. Multiple games, legs, and props, all in one spot. It's so quick and easy, you can keep your focus on the games and your nachos. Or if you're focusing on one game, remember, you can place your same game parlays live during the action. Caesars Sportsbook, the only sportsbook app with Caesars rewards.
Welcome back to the LSU Sports Insider Podcast. Now, from, I don't know about a heartbreaking loss, but a disappointing loss to just a dominating performance to open the season for LSU's baseball team. Are we calling it number 2 or number 3?
I'm calling it number 3 because of the D1, because I use D1 baseball.
Okay.
Yeah.
Some polls, LSU's number 2, some they're number 3, but they looked the part against Indiana, Purdue, Fort Wayne, which I guess against a team called Indiana, Purdue, Fort Wayne, you should look the part. But you can only play who's in front of you. LSU outscored the mighty Mastodons 32-2. They pitched it well. They hit it well. I have a couple stats. If you don't mention them, I will. That sort of, I think, put an exclamation point on how dominant they were. But what stood out to you about this weekend, Koki?
Yeah, you don't want to overreact too much when they're playing a team like, Indiana, Purdue, Fort Wayne, right? Among their non-conference matchups, this is probably one of the weaker ones, relatively speaking. But they walked 2 batters and hit 1 batter the whole weekend, which is kind of insane. And they also struck out 45 batters, which is the most they've struck out in a 3-game series against a single opponent since at least 1992, when they started.
Not even Paul Skeens could help them do that.
Any opponent. SEC non-conference.
Yes, any opponent. It was the most 45 strikeouts to 2 walks and 1 hit by pitch, which is some pretty absurd numbers, right? And it kind of tells you how dominant the pitching was, especially out of the bullpen, because I think the bullpen had only one of those walks the whole weekend, which is usually not. These relievers, you put them in those relief roles so you don't expose them to potential, because sometimes those guys can be a little bit wild, right? And not at all.
Now, it is a little easier to throw strikes when you've got a 6, 8, 10-run lead in the 7th inning in February. You can just pump the ball in.
And you're facing hitters that are more likely to swing at that slider in the dirt, for example.
It's a little bit different than it is in the SEC, but I would still say a very positive sign. And you kind of half mentioned the stat I had, so I'll reiterate. The pitching staff, 45 strikeouts and 3 free bases, hits or hit by pitches or walks. On the other side, LSU's lineup struck out only 13 times and took 30 free bases, 23 walks, and 7 hit batters. So utterly dominant. Let's stick with pitching just for a second. Who impressed you the most? The starters each went 5 innings. Each were very good. We saw some, as you mentioned, very good pitching out of the bullpen. But give us a name of somebody who you weren't sure if they were going to be ready to contribute, and they obviously were.
Chase Shores gave up a run, but he was really good. And given some of the control issues that he had during the preseason, I was going into that game being like, oh, they're going to sort of break this walk streak maybe a little bit. He might walk a few guys. There might be some traffic on the bases. He's still coming back from that Tommy John surgery. It's going to take some time for Chase to look like Chase. And then he came out there and, he gave up a run the first inning. One was a solid hit. One was kind of a cheapy hit. But then after that, he just rolled. He gave 1 hit from after the first inning, had 7 strikeouts. Fastball was up to 98 miles an hour with run. Slider looked really good. Once he really started mixing in that off-speed pitch to go on with his fastball, it was over. Because Purdue Fort Wayne did a pretty good job of gearing up for that early on in the first inning. It's like, oh wow, they put a couple singles together against this 98 mile per hour, 6'8" fire-breathing dragon. But once he started to mix in his pitches, it was over. And as I said, he was throwing strikes. I don't think he walked a single batter all game. And given the fact that was his first appearance in 22 and a half months, that's pretty impressive.
And is his velocity back to what it was before Tommy John?
More or less, yeah. I mean, he was hitting 100 a little bit more consistently before that. I haven't seen him hit 100 since, but he's still 98 to 99. It's still 98 to 99 when he wants it. So I don't know. And he's probably a little bit more polished than he was even back then. So, I think it definitely helped him that he had this extra time to recover instead of getting back from Tommy John in 14 or 15 months. It was 22. But at the same time, it was a pretty impressive performance, especially from a strikes and command standpoint for Chase, I'd say.
And Zach, we talked about X factors in women's basketball. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Koki, but I think Chase Shores is a real X factor for this LSU baseball team, because having that third starter, that Sunday guy, something they haven't really had consistently the past couple of years. I think that would be huge for them this season.
Reed put the nail on the head. I mean, last year they went 2-8 in game threes in conference play, which is not good at all. And a lot of those games were just straight out blowouts. And now they have actual, it seems like, at least, knock on wood for LSU fans' sake, but it seems like they have not just 3 potential starters, but maybe 4 or 5, because we haven't even seen Connor Ware or Gavin Guidry or Zach Cowan pitch yet. They didn't even pitch this weekend, and they put up those numbers. And those 3 guys are going to pitch innings during conference play. So it's it was a really impressive weekend for the pitching staff, and Anthony Ianson pitched pretty well, and Kate Anderson looked like the ace that he was build out to be. So it's Purdue Fort Wayne, so you don't want to overreact with too much of the stuff, and I'd say maybe even especially with the strikeouts, but especially with the command that they showed as a staff as a whole. Like, that's really impressive stuff.
Yeah, I mean, look, we get it. This is not a good team they played. I think you all get it too. Like this,
I will say this: they beat your beloved Missouri Tigers twice last year, and they beat Indiana last year in a single game. So, like, it's not impossible for this team to be competitive against some of these bigger schools.
I wasn't even aware Missouri had a baseball program.
Okay,
I'm
they do.
It's, look, I don't. Again. Are they a great team? No. Are they the worst team in the country? Probably not. They're probably not the worst. Like, you can take from this what you want, right? If you were excited about the season, they gave you no reason to be any less excited about the season. If you were not excited about the season, you're probably still in the same boat, and you're saying, I want to see it against somebody good. But I think you can only play who's in front of you. And again, I mentioned the strikeouts and walks, but like IPFW hit 156. They had an OPS of 349. That's not a slugging percentage. That's slugging plus on base. It was 160.
You hope that's your on base percentage.
Yeah, it was 167 slugging and 163 or 183 on base. It's like that. That's like an opposing pitcher coming to bat every single time. And on the flip side, LSU hit their slash line 340. 488, 557. So it's like an opposing pitcher against prime Barry Bonds every time for the whole week. Like at the plate, we have his picture up here. To me, you could go a lot of ways. Derek Curiel, the freshman, had a good start. Honestly, Stephen Milam was like one of the few guys who didn't have a good.
Yeah, he didn't play very well.
A good weekend, but this just one weekend.
Yeah, it's one weekend.
I thought Daniel Dickinson was the star of the show. I mean, that guy can hit.
Yeah, he had a very impressive weekend, but again, it's sort of that give and take of what do you sort of want to take away with him. And with Danny in particular, I think that I really want to see what he looks like against SEC level of pitching, because at Utah Valley, he probably saw more teams like Purdue Fort Wayne than he saw, teams that with the level of pitching that we see week in week out in the SEC. So I think he's going to play really well in these non-conference games, as he should, and as we saw at Utah Valley. It's just the question of how well is he going to be able to hit this top SEC pitching when he's seeing the high velocity? He said he may have even said this, but the velocity kind of gave him trouble this summer in the Cape League when he kind of saw it consistently for the first time. So you hope that was just more of a warm up to this level of pitching than a forecast for what's to come. So I'm really curious to see what his season looks like once we sort of get into it in conference play, especially. But we may see it a little bit in a couple of weeks when they play Dallas Baptist and Nebraska and Kansas State and some of these teams that are going to have a chance to at least make a regional. So again, it was a really good start for him regardless. And you mentioned Derek Curiel as well. It was that patience and that mature approach at the plate shown through once again.
Yeah, I mean, you can just tell this guy's going to be really good. Chris Stanfield had a good weekend. Michael Braswell had a good weekend.
Jared Jones, didn't he hit a homer?
He had a homer, yeah.
Ashton Larson came in and started one game on Friday and had 5 RBIs. They've got some hitters.
That was really interesting because Ashton Larson didn't even start the first 2 games, and then he was their best hitter on Sunday. And it was just evidence of can you really sit this guy? He's going to just force his way back into the lineup again like he did last year. But that's going to be hard when, they have a lot of faith in Jake Brown. They love what the progress that he showed through the fall and in the preseason. Chris Stanfield and Derek Curiel played every day. And then you have Josh Pearson, who's been a starter for the last 3 years. So one of those guys has to sit, even if one of them's the DH. And we haven't even mentioned Ethan Fry, who actually started the Saturday game as the DH. So it's just too many options and not enough spots to put these guys in. And I thought if I had to pick between which side of the ball was stronger, I think the pitching was probably more impressive than the hitting. They got off the slow starts at the plate on Saturday and on Sunday. I mean, they were down 1-0 through 3 innings on Sunday. On Saturday, they couldn't really get the offense going until the 5th. So I'm picking nits here, but overall, it was, they dominated the way that they should against a team like Purdue Fort Wayne. Like, if you're going to be a top 3 team in the country and you're playing a team like Purdue Fort Wayne, you want to see these results.
I mean, you see it in every sport, not just baseball, but you see top teams early in the season, or supposed top teams playing, one of these bye games and going, well, how are they losing to that team, or why are they only beating that team by 1 run or by 5 points in basketball, or whatever the case is? Like, that's kind of a red flag. It doesn't always mean something, but it could. And it just like it doesn't always mean something that you thrashed them 3 times, but it's better than the alternative.
I mean, last year they had trouble beating Central Arkansas twice in the opening weekend. They lost to Stony Brook 5-2. They lost to Xavier 2-1. So they weren't dominating as much early in the season as they did this past weekend. And they had some dominant wins. Don't get me wrong. I think there was one game they scored 27 runs or something insane. But I think the consistency of the dominance, especially in the pitching side with the lack of walks that they had. I think that should be your biggest takeaway from this past weekend.
And we'll see if they can keep it rolling. And the games are thick and fast, as they say in European soccer. They are coming quickly. Starting today, in fact, by the time you listen to this podcast, LSU will already be playing or have already played Southern. That game's at 2:00 this afternoon. Then tomorrow, Wednesday, they get Nichols. And then this weekend, it's a 3-game set with Omaha at the box. So
then they hit the road. Yeah.
Any sense on whether any of those teams is a step up from IPFW? I mean, is there?
I think Nichols in theory can be, but pitching wise, you're going to get, their 4th game in 6 or 7 days, or so.
But for both teams. So.
Yeah, it's for both teams, but there's more of a drop off when you're facing a team like Nichols than if you're facing a team like LSU. So obviously, and then the Southern game is probably more or less the same level, but they lost the Southern last year, so you can't write this game off.
I remember that they did.
Midweek games are a different animal, especially early in the season.
Yeah, that's true. But you can't. Jay Johnson's going to use that as motivation for this game. Don't. There's no question about that. So,
what about Omaha? Does proximity to the College World Series rub off in any way? I mean, what are we looking at with the Mavericks?
I think in theory they'll probably be a little bit better than Purdue Fort Wayne. But Omaha, that'll be interesting to see how it goes.
Omaha.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's coming up for LSU baseball. And I mean, like you referenced, Koki, the season really gets going that following week when they play Dallas Baptist, and then they've got Kansas State and Nebraska.
Both teams have made regionals.
Yes. Yeah. So you're talking about a real step up in competition. Then it'll be conference play before too long. I mean,
then it's another weekend. They got a 3-game set against North Alabama. They got 2 games with North Dakota State in between that and that North Alabama weekend. Then they got a midweek against Xavier, and then we got conference play against your Missouri Tigers.
Impressed with the knowledge of the schedule here, because a baseball schedule is not easy. It's one thing to memorize a basketball schedule.
I'm looking it over a lot.
That is impressive
for one reason or another.
It's impressive. I can't keep track of the basketball schedule. So
I got to keep looking. Okay, so before we get going, a couple more things to mention. On the other diamond, the LSU softball team, don't sleep on them. They're off to a 10-0 start. They're up to number 5 in the country. I looked this up before. It's speaking of not remembering schedules, but they did have a couple of impressive wins. Northwestern was one of their top 25 wins.
Virginia Tech
was the other. They beat Northwestern 7-1 and 8-0, and then they beat Virginia Tech 7-2 and 7-4. So, they hosted an invitational this weekend. They play Penn State, Southern Miss, and Nichols. And then next week, I'll tell you, this is a big one out in California. They get UCLA, who's always good in softball. Utah, Notre Dame. I mean, so Beth Torina's team, Reed, I know you did some reading on them. I'm not going to sit here and pretend we've watched every game, but obviously this is as good of a start as they could have hoped for.
Yeah, absolutely. And the four actually ranked wins are a pretty big deal. Big picture wise, LSU softball has not been Oklahoma City since 2017, right? And so it's been quite a while for them, especially by their standards, and especially how they got started when Beth Torina took over the program over a dozen years ago. So yeah, you're hoping to get back to Oklahoma City, get back to the World Series, and what you need is you need a lot of hitting, you need pitching depth, and I think based on the first 10 games, it's early, but it looks like they might have what they need to make another run at it. Obviously, the SEC is a different beast. It always is. Every sport, especially true in softball, and now Oklahoma softball is in the mix in the SEC now, so it's even tougher now. But it'll be interesting to see if they can finally break through and make it back to OKC, because it's been quite a heavy drought for them in recent years.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And then so you have LSU Gymnastics at number 3, and we discussed why that is. LSU baseball at 2 or 3, depending on who you ask. Softball's at 5, women's basketball's at 7. And then you have the men's basketball team, and I'm not making this comparison to poke fun at them, but it was a good weekend for them too. They rallied from a big deficit, and this time, instead of blowing the lead against Ole Miss, they get a win at Oklahoma. Much needed win for that team. We're going to have TJ on. We're going to try to get him on Thursday's podcast to talk a little bit about that. And then they play South Carolina tonight. So it is a rare opportunity in this rugged SEC for 2 straight wins for the men's basketball Tigers.
Yeah, a second straight win would be pretty big. You have to take the small victories, when you have a season going like this. So I think it should be a pretty big boost for them if they can beat South Carolina, which is definitely in play.
Yeah, this game was like the opposite of the Ole Miss game, where they had the 13-point lead and 11 or 12-point lead, and then Ole Miss goes on a 13-0 run in the last 3 minutes. In this game, I mean, Oklahoma had control of it with under a minute left. I think they were up by it was like 6 or 7,
yeah.
And then they just blew it. So
and
it was
Oklahoma's
interesting how this
right on
stuff
the bubble.
works.
I mean, that's a painful loss for them.
Oh, yeah.
That's not our discussion here. I mean, LSU is favored by 3.5 against South Carolina tonight. It's only the second time they've been favored in the SEC play. The first one was against Arkansas, which was the first game they won. They were favored by like a point, depending on where you looked. So depending on when you bet it or whatever, when you looked, this may be the first time they've been favored in SEC play. And again, like they are 3-9 in the SEC. 2-10. 2-10 in the SEC, looking for their third win. It is nothing to write home about. No one is excited about a 3-10 season, or 2-10 season, 3-10 if they win tonight. But at this point, you just try to go out and accomplish little things and see if you can get some momentum going into Nashville for the SEC tournament, and then you see what happens. One thing LSU could still chase is a 500 season overall. They're 13-12 after beating Oklahoma. They beat South Carolina. That's 14-12. Maybe you find another win before the tournament. You could finish the season 500.
Yeah, and are you thinking about the NIT? I haven't looked at it too closely, but
they seem a little far out of that.
Yeah, I am not an NIT-ologist. I couldn't tell you. But if you have a winning record in a power conference, you are eligible for the NIT. And I would say, given the strength of the SEC, like 11 or 12 SEC teams are going to the NCAA tournament. Mm-hmm. You would figure 2 or 3 more could get into the NIT. LSU's probably not there right now. If they could beat South Carolina, pick off one more somewhere in the last couple of weeks, maybe win a game in Nashville and get to the point where you're, 17-15, you would at least get a look.
Yep.
And I know there's been some talk about, moving on from Matt McMahon after the season, but that never seemed totally likely given that they gave him a 6-year contract to come here in the first place. And 2, 7-year contract, my bad. And 2, like, it would, in terms of just cost, it would be more expensive to buy him out, bring in a new coach who you're probably going to have to pay more, and then add more to your NIL budget. Instead, what they're reportedly going to do is just add more to the NIL budget and keep Matt McMahon on I'm just spinning this forward here. But I think what this team needs is resources. This program needs resources. They need new facilities, which that may be on the way with the new arena. But I think, like, for the health of that program and to get up to the level of what all these other SEC schools are doing, it's not impossible. Like, who would have ever thought Alabama and Auburn would be the number 1 and number 2 teams in the country, right?
It's crazy.
Like, there's no reason why LSU can't be that. They just need to invest to that level, and it will be interesting to see how that happens and happens after this season.
That's like 12 or 13 of the SEC teams have been to the NCAA tournament in the last 2 years. So it can be done by just about anybody in this league if you put the resources behind it. Matt McMahon did, they talked about the NIL support that they're getting. I thought we can end here, but one funny thing he said that kind of made me raise my eyebrows was he said he was excited about the recruiting class and the NIL support, and he is learning how important transfers are in college basketball. That stuck out to me as like probably should have already known that one. Maybe he just misspoke. I don't know. But that one raised my eyebrows.
Yeah, and I think it's going to help to have a greater NIL fund to go after those transfers. I think it's probably smart in a financial sense to fund the collective before you fund the buyout. So we'll see how it plays out.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're going to be back on Thursday. The other interesting thing in college sports right now is this meeting between the SEC and the Big Ten taking place in New Orleans tomorrow, and today and tomorrow, I think. And it is going to be super interesting to see what they come out with as far as a proposal for the college football playoff. Going to talk a little bit about that Thursday with Scott Rabelais and Wilson Alexander. And as I mentioned, we'll try to get TJ to come on and talk some men's basketball as well. So that'll be our show Thursday. Had a little bit of everything for you today, a little LSU car wash, if you will. Some gymnastics, women's basketball, baseball, men's basketball, softball, all of the above. So we'll hit some football and some more men's basketball on Thursday. Until then, our thanks to Amelia Cotton, our producer. She made this show happen. For Reed Darcey and Koki Riley, I'm Zach Ewing. Thank you for watching the LSU Sports Insider.